All right, we are live, everyone. So, good morning. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time, we're all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And I'm really excited for today's session. Over the spring, we had the immensely pleasurable opportunity to work with the Friends of the Rouge Watershed on a series of really cool programs, and they are back now for the fall, for a fall colors walk in Toronto's National Urban Park, Rouge Park. So the Friends of the Rouge Watershed, they have worked with tens of thousands of volunteers over the last several decades, planting nearly 750,000 native trees. Today, they're going to do a little bit of a walk through Rouge Park, explain the fall color changeover, some really cool stuff going on in the park, some of the amazing wildlife they have there. And so I hope you guys are as excited as me to tune in and find out what lives near us. So Jim and Thivia, thank you so much for joining us, and take us away.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. And thank you for joining the Friends of the Rouge Watershed today, along with Jesse and Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. My name is Tivy, and I am the Environmental Project Coordinator here at Friends of the Rouge Watershed, or FRW for short. And today I'm joined by Jim Robb, who is the General Manager at Friends of the Rouge Watershed, and he'll be talking to you more about the important work that we do a little bit later. So today we have a lovely fall colors walk planned for you all right here in the eastern part of the Rouge Urban National Park. And right now we are standing just along the Fitch Meander here in the forest of the Rouge Park, which gives us a beautiful view right behind us. Unfortunately, we have had a little bit of a cold snap, so a lot of the leaves have fallen, but a lot of the leaves are still hanging on in some of the trees, such as the beech and oak, so we do have a lot to show you as well. So before I get started, I just wanted to do a land acknowledgement, just to show respect for the indigenous tribes and people that lived on this land and took care of it for thousands of years. So we respectfully acknowledge that we are gathered upon the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Convention, or Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in this community and on this territory. So now I'll pass it on to Jim, who will talk to you more about the Friends of the Rouge Watershed.
Hi, Jesse. I just wanted to do a sound check. How's our sound coming in?
You're sounding really great, Jim. It's going fantastically.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us today out in the Rouge Watershed. Behind you is the beautiful Finch Meander. Friends of the Rouge works on the protection and restoration of watersheds and ecosystems. So we have cleaner air to breathe, cleaner water to drink, biological diversity for people to enjoy and to share the earth with other species. And these cliffs you see behind us here, they go back, the sediments were deposited, some of them hundreds of thousands of years ago. So this is a really rich area, not only ecologically, but geologically. And you can go back in the sediments to times when North America actually had wild saber-toothed tigers and lions and camels and sloths and all kinds of creatures. So there's a great history told in these glacial deposits over hundreds of thousands of years. But why don't we go a little bit out of the wind now? Jade's going to show you a nice pan of this, and then we'll start our walk and we'll talk about native trees and colors.
Every year we marvel at the beauty of the fall colors, and we thought that it might be interesting to share some science behind why leaves change color in the fall. So the bright reds, oranges, purples, and yellows that we see are actually the result of chemical processes that take place in the trees as the seasons change from the summer to winter. And during the spring and summer, the leaves produce food that the trees need in order to continue to grow and survive. And this food-making process takes place in the leaf in numerous cells that contain chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is the pigment that causes the leaf to become green. And chlorophyll captures this energy through photosynthesis and absorbs this energy in order to it captures the energy and it transforms this energy or transfers it into from carbon dioxide and water into food that the trees can use, into carbohydrates such as starches and sugars. In addition to green pigments, leaves also contain various levels of yellow, orange, purple, and red pigments. And the yellow and orange pigments that are responsible for providing or giving the orange color to carrots are actually xanthophyll and carotene, which you can see in the leaves and some of the leaves behind us. And in the fall, as the temperatures change and the length of daylight changes, the leaves stop this leaf or food making process. And as a result, this causes the chlorophyll to break down and the green coloring to disappear, which leaves the yellow and orange pigment to become a lot more visible, which is what gives the leaves that we see in the fall their beautiful color. And other chemical processes also occur that create the beautiful red and purple colors that we see. And that chemical is called
anthocyanin. And it when you mix the red and the bluish color, anthocyanin is found in blueberries and dark cherries and things like that. So it has kind of a bluish color. So when you mix them together, you can get even a little bit of purple in some leaves.
Yeah, and those are, we can see those colors in some trees and shrubs such as dogwoods and sumacs, as well as some of the beautiful brown colors that we see in trees such as oaks.
Okay, so now we'll take a little walk and we'll look at some trees and we'll talk a little bit about them. And Tivia will actually show you some of the leaves and a little bit of how you identify them. So one of the first trees that we'll look at is this is an American beech. It has very smooth gray bark. And if there were still black bears in this area, you'd actually see the claw marks from where the black bears had climbed the tree. It leaves a scar. You can see it's like a big cat scratching post, only bear marks. And they love to eat the young leaves in the spring, and so they rip the bark. Tivia will show you what the American beech leaf looks like.
So this is what the American beech leaf looks like. American beech leaves are oblong to oval in shape, as you can see. And the margin of the leaf all the way around is serrated, where the end of each leaf vein comes to a sharp point. And in the fall, the leaves of the American beech turn a very beautiful golden yellow to brown, as you can see here, as well as on some of the leaves that are left on this tree here.
And on the little beech trees, the leaves don't fall off for quite a ways into the winter, so you often see them hanging on. Let's go a little further on. Let's see a birch. So white or paper birch is a really special tree in North America because native people discovered that you could cut into the bark of a tree. This one's maybe 30 centimeters. So if you got a big birch, 40, 50 centimeters, you could cut in about 1 centimeter deep and you could peel off the bark. And then you could use strips from deer hide to sew the bark together. And then you could seal it with pine sap and spruce sap. And then you could put in little sort of pieces of wood to form the shape of a canoe, and you could actually travel. So birch bark canoes were a technological discovery of real significance in this North America because there's so many lakes and rivers in Canada. There were no roads back then, certainly no airports and no railways. So the way that people got around was in birch bark canoes. And Tivia will show you what the leaf looks like.
So this is the leaf of a white birch. So all birches have toothed leaves that are simple and alternate. And Jim will show us what alternate branching looks like.
So one of the ways people use to tell different types of trees, one of the first thing you look at is, do the leaves or the branches, are the alternate or opposite? So you can see this is obviously opposite. This is a maple tree. Ash trees also have opposite leaves and opposite branches. See how they're opposite? This is a walnut tree, and it has alternate branches. They come out alternate like that. And so that's a basic thing. So ash and maple trees, they have opposite, and a lot of the other trees, they have alternate.
All right, and back to the white birch leaf. White birch leaves are egg-shaped or triangular shaped in nature, and the leaf margins, as you can see, are double-toothed all the way along the edges. And white birch leaves are rounded at the base as well, right by the stem. And in the fall, the leaves of the white birch turn a very pretty bright yellow color.
Okay, let's walk this way a little bit and we'll see some more trees. This is a tree I really love. My last dog was called Cedar because the color of the cedar, they make canoes out of cedar too, and they're beautiful, rich, sort of a tawny brown and yellowish color. And this is the leaves of the cedar, and they're so pretty. And Tivy will tell you a little bit about this. This is called a coniferous tree because pines and cedars and hemlock and tamaracks, they all produce cones. So they're called coniferous. I like to call them coniferous because it reminds me they're evergreen trees that produce cones.
As Jim mentioned, the eastern white cedar is a conifer that has scale-like leaves that closely overlap and have a leaf structure that looks similar to ferns. And cedars have a very distinctive aroma as well. And that's one way that you can identify the tree if you're ever walking through a forest. And we also use cedar leaf oil in a lot of medicine and perfumes that we use. And eastern white cedar is one of Ontario's most valuable trees for wildlife habitat, as it provides shelter and food to deer, small mammals, and many species of birds as well.
I don't think we have a leaf for this one, but this is one that has what's called a compound leaf. So it has a number of little leaves on a stem. This is bitternut hickory. Now, one of the things that makes the Rouge so special is that it's right at the mixing point between the Great Lakes forests, which are mainly maple and hemlock and beech and pine, and the southern forests that come up from the southern United States, from the Carolinas. They're called the Carolinium Forests, and they are things like tulip trees and sassafras trees and American sycamore and many, many types of hickory. In the Rouge, we have this beautiful blending that creates one of the most biologically diverse areas in Canada because we have the Carolinian trees like the hickory, the tulip tree, the sycamore, and we have the sugar maples and the birch and the pine and all the northern trees. So they mix together. So I don't think we have a leaf for this. So, oh, we do. Oh, you've got it. Bitternut hickory.
Yeah, so this is the bitternut hickory leaf, and as Jim mentioned, the bitternut hickory is a Carolinian species, which is a unique and diverse ecosystem zone that is found in southern Ontario. And the leaves of the bitternut hickory are alternate and compound, as Jim mentioned, and they usually have 7 to 9 leaflets. As you can see, the leaves become wider and broader towards the tip, and they are finely toothed or serrated all the way around the edges of the leaves. And in the fall, the leaves of the bitternut hickory turn a beautiful golden yellow color.
This is a nice red oak. It's probably about 110 years old, maybe, and it's about 65 to 75 centimeters diameter and probably about 25 meters tall. Red oak, as it goes up, the bark gets a pattern that some people think looks like the striping on a zebra, so it gets dark gray and light gray. So this is a beautiful red oak. They produce acorns. They help biodiversity because they create a lot of food in the forest with the acorns they drop, and a lot of butterflies and moths like to eat their leaves. Red oak and tibia.
So this is a red oak leaf, and as you can see, red oaks have 7 to 9 lobes that are separated by rounded notches. The lobes are usually sharply pointed and they have very bristly tips. And in the fall, red oak leaves turn a deep red color.
This tree has many names. One name is musclewood, because if you look at it, sort of looks like a strong tennis player's arm with all the little ripples and tendons. Musclewood. Another name is blue beech, and this is a Carolinian species further south in the United States, in Tennessee and the Carolinas. This grows into a tree. Up here, it's really just a bush. And interestingly, on this little brown spot we see, that's actually the egg mass of the gypsy moth. Now, gypsy moths were introduced from Europe, and they're a bit of a problem because they eat they eat evergreen trees and hardwood trees, they eat the leaves. But this is a gypsy moss egg mass. And this is, oh, and look at here. We have right over here, there's the pupa. That's the stage where the gypsy moth goes into a pupa before it comes out as the moth attached to the tree.
And I have a blue beech leaf to show you all. And blue beech leaves taper to a pointed tip and have edges that are very coarsely and sharply double-toothed or serrated all around the leaf margin. The veins are prominent and evenly spaced out along the mid-rib of the leaf. And in the fall, blue beech leaves turn a very bright red and orange color, which creates a beautiful contrast against the blue bark.
So this is a sugar maple tree. This is the most common tree in the Great Lakes forest zone and throughout much of eastern North America. This tree, you can imagine, native people did not have sugar. So what they found is that if you took some of the sap that runs in these trees in the spring and the fall, you could boil it and then put it in the snow, and it made a really tasty taffy. So you can imagine how Indigenous children must have thought what a treat this was. Once or twice a year, they got to have something really sweet like maple syrup taffy. And this tree, the little ones can grow right in the shade of their parents, so that this tree doesn't have to have a big opening to grow. It can grow right under its parents, and they'll wait patiently until another tree falls down, and then they'll shoot up into that opening in the canopy. And this is sugar maple, and Tivia will show you 3 different types of maple, this one and 2 others.
All right, so right here I have the leaf of a sugar maple, and many of you may notice or be familiar with the leaf of the sugar maple because it is the leaf that is featured on our Canadian flag. And so the sugar maple leaf has 5 lobes that come to a point at each corner. The sinuses are rounded, and the sugar maple leaves turn a very bright yellow, orange, or red in the fall. Now I also have a silver maple leaf to show you. And silver maples are a little similar to sugar maples, but they are easy to identify by the deep, narrow notches or valleys that separate the 5 lobes of the leaf. And silver maple leaves are also quite a pale or white or silver color on the undersides and green on the top, which is why it has the common name silver maple. And the last maple I have for you is a red maple. And a red maple is a little bit easier to identify just because they do turn a very pretty bright red color in the fall. And the leaves of a red maple are roughly toothed all the way around the edges. They have 3 to 5 shallow lobes, and the sinuses, or the valleys, have a V shape. And in the fall, the red maple leaves turn a very pretty bright red or orange color.
Now, this is a tree identification, but this is something that feeds on trees. It's a fungal disease. They call it target canker because it forms these concentric circles, kind of like a target you'd use for shooting a bow and arrow. And unfortunately, eventually weakens the tree, and a windstorm will snap the tree. So it's a fungal disease called target canker. Here's another beech tree, and the beech tree still has leaves. Now, if you look at the bark, unfortunately, this tree has a bark disease, which is killing a lot of our beech. It causes the bark to go all funny and wrinkly, and eventually it can weaken the tree. That's a beech. It's called an American beech, and it has alternate branching. How's our time? We must be pretty close. How's our time, Jesse?
You're doing fantastically, guys. We got about 5 more minutes if you want to share some more, and then we'll dive in with questions after that, if that works.
Okay, I'll hand it over to Tivia to go through the rest of the leaves.
All right, so we have some more oak leaves to go through. So right here I have a bur oak leaf, and bur oak leaves can be variable in shape, but they're usually wider above the middle, and the lower halves are separated by very deeply cut sinuses. And in summer, bur oak leaves are very shiny green on top and pale and hairy underneath. And in the fall, bur oak leaves turn a reddish brown color. In the same family of oaks, I also have a swamp white oak, which is a little less common. And it's, as I mentioned, a lesser common species, oak species that we can find in Ontario. And in the summer, the leaves are a shiny dark green color with fuzzy pale green on the underside. And in the white oak family, the leaves are rounded, and they have rounded lobes instead of pointed tips like the red oaks have. And in the fall, the leaves of the swamp white oak turn a golden brown to russet red color. And a fun fact about these oaks is that acorns from white oaks are actually much sweeter and tastier than those from red oaks. All right. Yeah, and we can follow Jim just over this way.
Jade, if you can just pan up to the white pine, and then we can come back here. So that's an eastern white pine tree. I love these trees. They can grow to be 30 stories high or about 30 meters high or about 15 stories. In parts of Ontario, like Temagami, there are some trees that are 350 or 450 years old. And so they were around almost the time of Columbus when he came to North America. And these trees, the British love them. They use the young trees about this size for masts on their sailing ships. So they really love these. And they used to put burn a stamp into it with the crown of the king or queen. And you dare not cut that tree because it was reserved as a mast pine for the king or queen's navy. You can see they have this furrowed bark. They're very tall, and they can live a long time. And Kitty is going to show you what they look like in the needles.
All right, so this is what the needles of the white pine tree look like. Being a conifer, the white pine has needles rather than leaves, and the needles are very long and skinny. The white pine is easy to recognize because the needles of a white pine grow in bunches of 5, and these trees can live to up to 200 years as well.
So I think that's Jesse. If you want to turn it over to questioning, Tivia and I would be happy to try and answer any questions that the students have.
Fantastic. What a cool talk, guys. I hope, the feedback so far on YouTube and live is that people were as excited as I was, but that was a really, really fun walk, and I learned a lot. So thank you guys so much. So as we dive in, if you're on YouTube, over 60 groups joining us on YouTube right now, which is amazing. So welcome into all of you. If you guys want to type questions in the chat bar, please do. Our live classes, I will come to you in 1 second, but I want to start with a question of my own I've always wanted to know, and that is, for an individual tree, does it turn the same color every single year, or does it change different colors? Do you have the same tree that will be yellow one year mostly, red the next year, or is it always the same?
That's a good question, Jesse. I'm not perfectly sure, but I can tell you the probability of a sugar maple is that it will turn yellow or orange and occasionally red. Sometimes it has to do with the temperature in the fall, the rainfall, and how cold it gets. So if it's cool and it doesn't get freezing, there's a greater likelihood that you'll have oranges, I think, and yellows. If it gets really freezing, I think you might have more reds, but I'd have to go and check on that. But any individual tree has a kind of a color shade that it tends to go towards, but depending on how quick and cold the cold comes in the fall and how dry the soil is, that all affects what the colors. That's why some years you have such beautiful, beautiful deep reds, and other years you have mainly orange.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jim. This year particularly has been really beautiful. I know we've got a bunch of classes in the GTA, and I think it's probably been the best fall for me anyway I've seen in many years. All right, Miss Kravis's class, they're joining us in Pickering. Just demute your microphones, and in fact, all our teachers can demute your microphones. You're all good to go. I can't hear you till I bring you in, so please do that. Miss Kravis's class, come on in and ask away.
We have a question from Ivy here that what's the longest that a tree could grow?
Well, it's really interesting. Some of the oldest trees are the slowest growing. So there's these bristlecone pine up in the Sierra Nevadas in California, and they might only be 10 or 15 feet tall or 3-4 meters tall. And they're kind of all gnarly, like they look like they're dead. And some of them are several thousand years old. And we've recently found these old little gnarly little white cedars on the Niagara Escarpment that also look kind of they're like bonsai trees. They're not too big and they're all twisted. And some of those are 800 or 900 years old. So it all depends on the species and the location. But as I was saying, the white pine up north, some of them grow 300-400 years. Sugar maple, if we don't cut them down, 200 or 300 years. A lot of it has to do with how kind we are to the trees. So we seem to cut them down a little bit while they're too young.
Great question, guys. Let's keep it rolling. Miss Clark's class joining us in Whitby. If you guys have a question, come on up to the camera and go for it.
We also have a question from an Ivy.
Perfect.
How do leaves change color?
How do leaves change color? So you mentioned this a bit at the beginning, but if you could walk us through again, that would be lovely, guys.
Yeah, so basically the green color you see in trees is from chlorophyll, and that's how they capture sunlight energy. The chlorophyll captures it, and they make sugar and oxygen, which we need to breathe. So that's what the green color is. In the fall, as the winter approaches and it gets cold, the tree stops making its chlorophyll, and the chlorophyll breaks down. And underneath the green, there are already colors there. They're just kind of hidden. There's yellows and oranges, like the carotenes produce, like carrots produce. There's even some blues, like the anthocyanins produce. So it's really the disappearance and breakdown of the chlorophyll that lets the other colors shine. And if you think about it, if you take sunlight and you pass it through a prism, it'll divide it in the beautiful colors of a rainbow. That's what little droplets of water do. So it's the same kind of thing. Those colors are all there. They're just hidden by the green of the chlorophyll.
Fantastic, guys. We're getting some great questions on YouTube too, which I'm going to come to in a minute. I want to go to Miss Hartwell's class, also joining us in Whitby today, right on the border of Rouge Park. So Miss Hartwell, student, go for it.
What kind of animals live in the trees?
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. Do you know we actually have northern flying squirrels in the Rouge, and you almost never see them because they're nocturnal. But I had a friend who was studying them, and he went and he knocked on a tree where he knew there was one living, and it was in the daylight, and it woke up and it came out and it was rubbing its eyes just like you would when you first woke up. And they're so cute. They have big buggy eyes because they need them for the living in the dark and flying around. They don't actually fly. They kind of glide. They put out their legs and they have skin flaps that kind of allow them to glide. But we have deer in the Rouge. We have coyotes. We have even some otters, muskrats. We have all kinds of birds. Today we saw a beautiful Carolinium woodpecker. We saw some blue jays and some chickadees. So there's a lot to see in the Rouge. This is one of the most biologically diverse areas in all of Canada, and it's right next to our biggest city.
That is super cool. I had no idea we had otters in Toronto or the GTA in general. That's very neat. All right, I'm coming when I'm done. Miss Haven's class, they don't have their mic working right now, so they're joining us in the Lambton Kent District School Board area near Sarnia. And so their first question is how big the park is and how many different types of trees or leaves are there?
That's a great question. Well, the park itself right now is about 79 square kilometers, which if you want to think of it, think of how big a soccer field is. It's about 16,000 soccer fields. So it's pretty big. It goes all the way from Lake Ontario, 25 kilometers north through Scarborough, Markham, Stouffville, and Pickering, and all the way up to the Oak Ridges Moraine, which is a big hilly area with lots of sand and gravel left by the glacier. So it's about 25 kilometers north-south and an average of 3 kilometers wide. It's pretty big. It's bigger than 4 or 5 other national parks in Canada. So it's pretty good. And the number of species, I think we have about 70 species of trees, about maybe 100 species of flowering shrubs, and probably over 1,000 plant species.
Yeah. How neat is that? One thing I want to share for everyone who's online, if you're in the general Toronto area, check on Google for the City of Toronto Biodiversity Series. We're very lucky in Toronto that the city, alongside some other amazing organizations, produced really comprehensive, beautiful series highlighting some of the amazing animal, plant, and fungi groups in the city. So check these out. You can just type that straight into Google and find about some of the crazy creatures that live near us. So I hope you guys get a chance to do that. All right, we're going to go to Jo. She's joining us in Mount Orab in Wisconsin. She's been our most popular student over the last month. Jo, do you have a question for us?
Yes. What's your favorite or the coolest tree you have?
The coolest tree, Jim, Divya.
Well, I like the eastern white pine because it lives so long, it grows so tall, and the branches are different on each one because the branches get snow on it in the winter, and sometimes the wind will snap one branch and not another. So every white pine is pretty distinctive. They all have their own little shapes and personalities. And the needles I like too because they're really soft, and when you go camping, they create a nice soft cushion and you put your tent on it and get a really good night's sleep. So I think I like the eastern white pine quite a bit.
Yeah. Tivia, what do you think? Is this a competition? Are we all eastern white pine lovers or what?
I would say the eastern white pine is also my most favorite tree just because it is really soft, and when it's blowing in the wind, it looks very pretty.
Okay, well, I'm going to make a plug for the white poplar because there's one down the park near me in the Humber, and it's super cool. It looks like a bunch of trees all mashed together and has some really unique leaves. So, okay, we got white in the name no matter what, but hopefully you guys have some of your own favorite trees as well. All right, we're going to take a few questions from YouTube. We've been getting some great questions. So, Jim, Tivia, a lot of questions on trees' ages. How do you tell a tree's age? Can you tell it by rings? Is there another way that you can tell it just walking through the forest?
Well, eastern white pine, when they're not too old, you can tell because they grow a layer of branches each year. So if you count the layers of branches, you can actually tell how old the tree is. But most of the way foresters and scientists do it is trees grow a ring of wood every year, and you can put a little coring thing you turn. It's like a little drill. It goes into the tree, and it'll take out a little bit of the tree all the way to the core, and then you can count the rings and you can tell how old it is. And trees put on in the spring, the cells are pretty fat and big because there's lots of water and conditions are good. As the summer comes on, the cells get really tiny, so you can actually see the difference. And scientists can use the rings from existing trees and then old pieces of wood to actually piece together the climate because they can tell how much it rained and whether it was a good year based on the width of the rings.
Super cool, guys. All right, and then we'll take a few more from YouTube. So Miss Kravis's class, if you guys have another question for us, come on up.
Okay. Yep, I have a question from Braden, who wants to know what is the biggest a tree could get?
Sure.
Well, some of the tallest trees are in Canada. They're in Carmana, and they're the tallest. They're about 100 meters or 33 stories high. And that's about as high as trees can move the water up to feed their branches. It's pretty remarkable. They can actually, if you had an apartment building, you'd have to have 3 or 4 pumping stations to get the water moved up to the top floor. In terms of diameter, probably the biggest trees are the sequoias and the redwoods on the west coast of the United States in Oregon and Northern California. But we do have really big Western red cedar in Canada. I've seen ones 14, 15 feet in diameter, but I've actually, when I was very young, my family went and saw the redwoods and the sequoias, and there was one you could actually drive through. It was so wide. I wish they hadn't cut the hole through it, but you could drive through it.
Sorry, it's so funny you say that, because the first time I heard about that tree you could drive through was my exact same thought. But incredible forest on the west coast of Canada and the United States. And then in Rouge Park, we got a chance earlier to highlight some really, really big trees that are local to us here. Great question, Miss Kravis, student. All right, Miss Clark's class, come on back up. Go for it. Hey.
Why do not all trees lose their leaves?
Why do not all trees lose their leaves? Good question.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Well, the reason trees lose their leaves, they form a little waxy layer between the leaf and the wood of the tree to protect the wood from rot or things like that, called the abscission layer. Now, some trees like the beech beside us and the oaks, that abscission layer doesn't form very well, so they hang on to it. Now, evergreens, they have a special strategy. They produce antifreeze so that their needles don't get damaged by the frost. Have you ever looked at the window and the Jack Frost crystals and how they look like little sharp knives? Imagine if freezing inside the leaves of the tree, if all those Jack Frost crystals, they just slice and dice the plant cells. But with cedar and pine and that, they produce antifreeze so the Jack Frost crystals form. Now, the hardwood trees, they don't produce that, so they have to drop the leaves, because otherwise the cold and the frost would just kill them anyways. So that's their strategy. When it's freezing out, they don't have their leaves. The evergreens, they've got the antifreeze, they can keep them.
Yeah. Awesome, guys. All right, we're going to go to Miss Hartwell's and Miss Haven's class in just a minute. And Joe, I want to take a couple on YouTube. So a bunch of people were asking about cedars. They're talking about, do cedars lose their leaves in the winter? Pam noticed that some of the leaves turn brown on cedars. So she wanted to know if there's anything about that, if them losing them before winter. Anything you can share with us about cedars?
Yeah, so what's happening in evergreen trees, they lose about, let's say they've got needles that have been on for 3 or 4 years. So the 3 or 4 needles are kind of wearing out. Their photosynthesis machinery is wearing out. So you'll see at this time, pine and the cedars, the inner leaves aren't really getting as much sunlight and they're getting a bit old. They go brown and they drop. But the outer leaves that are still getting a lot of sunlight and can do photosynthesis, they stay on. So the fall, a lot of evergreens, pines, and cedars, the inner part goes brown, but the outer part stays green.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. All right, Tivia, this is something that you talked about earlier. Miss Haven's class wants to know, or specifically Milo wants to know, how trees release that oxygen. You talked a little about that, but if you could share with us again, that would be great.
Do you want to go?
Oh, okay, I'll do it. So, photosynthesis is magical. It really is. Trees take clear carbon dioxide. You can't see it. It's invisible. They take clear water from the ground, and they capture sunlight energy in this little machinery inside the cell, the chlorophyll. And they change that clear carbon dioxide and clear water into sugar. And wood is made up of long chains of sugar, just not that different than the sugar on your table, except that instead of it being 1 or 2 little sugar molecules, you know what Lego looks like? Picture the sugar on your table is like 2 Lego joined together. It's a sucrose. And then picture the wood in the tree. It's like thousands of Legos joined together like a snake. And that's what makes the wood on the tree so strong, are these long snaky chains of sugar. And then when it's giving you the sugar, it's also giving you the oxygen. And we can't live for more than several minutes without oxygen. So the photosynthesis is what changed the earth and made it inhabitable for higher organisms like us. So we owe plants a lot.
Yeah, that was such an enthusiastic answer. And sugar snake Legos is not a term I ever thought I'd hear. So I really appreciate that, Jim. What a cool analogy. All right, I'm going to go to Joe first and then wrap up with a question from Miss Hartwell, student waiting patiently at the camera. So Joe, if you have a question for it, come on in.
So it's funny because at my house, we have a bunch of trees that you mentioned, and 2 flying squirrels have came into our house. Anyways, my question is there like a certain tree that like
A certain
I
tree.
don't know how to explain it. It's like,
Are there certain trees that squirrels like?
Or Joe, you can let me know in the chat bar if it helps. You're having
yeah.
trouble thinking. Okay, let me know in the chat bar if you think of it, and if you don't by the end of the broadcast, I'll make sure your question gets to Jim and Tivia. Okay?
Mhm.
Awesome. But thanks for highlighting squirrels. The moment you guys mentioned flying squirrels, by the way, all the comments came in about how many people love flying squirrels. So I'm glad we got a chance to highlight that. I've never seen one personally my whole life in Toronto. So I'd love to do that one day. Maybe riding an otter. Miss Hartwell's class, if you guys want to come in for a question, go for it.
How do maple trees make maple syrup?
How do maple trees make maple syrup?
Well, that's a good one, and I haven't looked at it in a while, but I'll do my best. Remember I was telling you that trees through photosynthesis make sugars? Well, in maple trees, they make a lot of sugar, and they store it in their bark and in the inner part of their wood. And so when the temperature turns cold in the fall, or when it just warms up in the spring, the sugary sap in the tree can flow. And so people put in these little spigots. They're like a little spout that they drill into the tree, and it taps into that flow of sap, and the sugar, they get that sugary water, the sap that comes out of the tree. They collect it in buckets, and you have to boil it. It takes about 40 gallons of tree sap to create 1 gallon of maple syrup. So if you've had maple syrup, it took 40 gallons of tree sap to produce 1 gallon of that. And so it's all the sugars produced by photosynthesis that the maple tree is stored up. People take a little bit off in the spring and the fall, and then they can make tasty maple syrup.
Fantastic. I don't know if they'll be open this year because of COVID and stuff, but a lot of conservation areas in Toronto or the GTA allow you to go and see the maple syrup harvesting process in action. It's super cool. And you get some maple syrup at the end, and that's the best possible end to every nature hike. Joe had one last question. She just shared it online. So what is the biggest tree in Toronto? We talked about in Canada. How about here in the Rouge?
That's a tough one too. I was in downtown Toronto one time, and I saw about an 8-foot diameter red oak, and it's one of the biggest trees I've ever seen in Toronto. So I think probably one of the big oaks in downtown Toronto might be one of the biggest. The Rouge was heavily deforested. The early Europeans took far too much of the forest. They logged about 90% of the Rouge. So all the trees you see around here are probably only 50 to 100 years old, because 150 years ago, this would have been clear cut.
Yeah, that's oh, go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
We do still have we have some 4 and 5 and 6 foot diameter oaks and a few 3 and 4 diameter pine in the Rouge. And hopefully if we take care of them now, when you are 80 or 90 years old, these young children, you'll be able to see 3 and 4 foot diameter pines all over the Rouge and oaks.
Half my fun when I go in the forest is to give a tree a big hug. So when you can't reach your arms around the tree, that's a good sign that the tree is very old and has been around for a very long time. These have been some great questions, guys. Really thoughtful questions from all our classes live and on YouTube. I want to stress, if you guys want to learn more about the Friends of the Rouge Watershed, go to friendsoftherouge.ca. They do amazing work in preserving one of the coolest habitats in the world. Again, a major forest, a hugely biodiverse area right in the side of a major world city. So check out friendsoftherouge.ca. Tivia and Jim, thank you so much. Is there any last message you want to leave kids with about the Rouge itself, about getting out in nature, anything you want to wrap us with?
Well, I think the United Nations and the scientists have said that if we can put back about 1 million hectares of land into forests and wetlands worldwide, it'll help us fight climate change and the crisis we have there, and it will help us to restore a chance for the plants and animals we share this earth with to have a home. So I'm hoping that governments all around the world will start to put back forests and wetlands to restore them so that we can stabilize our climate, we can have clean air and water, and we can have healthy biodiversity for the future generations to enjoy.
And there's no better message than that for all our students. Again, I mentioned this at the top of the broadcast. We've got a live tree planting with Friends of the Rouge next week, so hopefully you can tune in live or join live on camera for that. Tomorrow, we're partnering with EcoSpark, another amazing Toronto organization, to learn how to become a young naturalist. But you guys can take part at home in helping preserve ecosystems, protect biodiversity, and beyond. Jim and Tivia, this is great. Thank you so much. Jim, I know you've done these with us before. Tivia, this is your first. So how we end every broadcast, we bring in all our classes to say a big thank you and goodbye. So Miss Kravis, Miss Clark, Miss Hartwell, and Joe, join me in saying a big thanks. And hope you guys enjoyed